Streaming on Facebook. Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good.
The radical, fundamental.
Wait a minute. I know what's wrong. Okay. I need to weigh these after all. Okay.
The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody to the Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday afternoon here in Puerto Rico. I've got Alex Epstein with me to talk about Michael Moore's latest documentary. So, hey, Alex, how are you?
Hey, when are you going to learn how to pronounce my last name?
I don't know. I had it in my head right before I started the show, and then it came out wrong. It's really pathetic.
And it's become so the Epstein version has become so popular with Jeffrey Epstein. I did this video recently, and that had a lot of views, and I looked at the comments, and I think fully half of them were, this Epstein isn't really dead or didn't kill himself. It's just like, great.
Yes, things like that stick. So I apologize. I literally was thinking about it before the show, and I'm going to get it right this time. And I screwed it up. All right. How's things in Southern California? You still in house?
Good. Well, I'm enjoying seeing some of the protests happen. Because Lord Gavin Newsom saw a picture he didn't like in Newport Beach, and so he decided to lock down all the beaches. And then basically we said no, and then he sent California Highway Patrol to enforce it. Oh, so wow. A lot of the beaches are like the main beach in Laguna Beach that everyone had been going to is now empty. But I was able to surf this morning at an undisclosed location.
Yes. In the last few weeks, I had a friend here who was staying at a community outside of the city where the police, once every 3 weeks would show up and enforce the no beach thing. Mm-hmm. So we, at least once a week, we would go to the beach, and the last week before he left, we were there, I think 3 times. So we were really enjoying the beach. But driving there for half an hour, we'd have groceries with us just in case the police stopped us. So we could say, oh no, we're grocery shopping or whatever. It's so.
Oh, wow. This is when you were in Southern California?
No, this is now here in Puerto Rico.
Oh, in Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, of course, in Southern California, they've got, we've got a curfew. We cannot go outside between 7 p.m., even drive or anything from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. A curfew. So it's bad.
They should keep that indefinitely and just keep everyone extra safe.
Yes. And, I've often said they should just not let men out the house, and then murder goes down. Rape certainly goes down a lot. And generally assault, all of the violence go down.
Because the government doesn't need evidence to treat you as a threat. So no, it should, if you could hypothetically be a threat, then you should be locked in your home.
If you're capable of damage, then you should not be allowed to even accidentally maybe cause it. And since men cause most of the damage out there, just keep them around, I guess, for reproduction and lock them up at home for the rest of the time. So. Which brings us to Michael Moore's new movie.
Yeah, it's anti-all humans.
Yes, they don't even want to lock you up. They just don't want you there. So you've watched the movie. I watched the movie, but you're the expert here. So before we get to, I think what's interesting here is going to be to talk about
radical.
Oh, I pressed the button. I think what's going to be interesting here is to talk about what, in a sense, they don't say in the movie, right? They don't actually explicitly come out and say. But before we get to that, there's a lot of interesting stuff in the movie. Actually is true, right? That is actually educational for a lot of people. So What are some of the things that they bring out in the movie that is that's interesting and true?
I mean, one way to frame this is there's this term green energy. And the idea is we're going to get all of our energy from usually solar, wind, and batteries, and then sometimes biofuels. So that's based on living plant matter like trees or corn crops or sugarcane. And I think there are two basic criticisms you can make of green energy. And the one I'm focused on is it's not really energy.
Yeah.
That is, it doesn't provide reliable energy at low cost in all the different forms on a scale of billions of people. That's for me the problem, because energy is crucial for people's lives. But the other thing you could say, in addition to the green energy isn't really energy, it isn't really green in the sense of having little impact on nature. No form of energy has little impact on nature, in part because the whole purpose of energy is to impact nature. It's literally to do physical work to manipulate matter in nature. But then even to produce it is, nature doesn't give us just electricity directly from the sun. So there's always an industrial process required to transform energy from its raw form into its usable form. And part of what's gone on with green energy is people just think, oh, the electricity just like the sun somehow beamed it to my house, and then it came out of the plug and it's clean and everything is dirty. And so there was always this really big opportunity to take the halo off green energy, so to speak, by showing what is actually the process behind the scenes. And that's, I think, the most interesting, relatively true part of this movie, is that you see in visual form many of the industrial processes that go into producing so-called green energy. And then because of the philosophy of the movie, all the industrial processes are viewed as bad. So like you melting metal, bad, taking up
Mining.
land,
Yep.
bad, yeah, mining, everything. But you then also do see certain things that one would regard as undesirable, as in like, in particular, because green energy takes up a huge amount of space, they end up just bulldozing really, really scenic areas where for something like nuclear or natural gas, you wouldn't need to do that at all. So I think overall, the one value of the movie, and it is a significant value, is to visualize the process by which green energy is produced and to view it as a process. And that's something the fossil fuel industry has really failed to do historically. One thing is they've had a reluctance to criticize green energy. And as part of that, they haven't been willing to say, well, our product is better than others. And they're not willing to say, well, we're better at producing energy at a large scale. But they're also not willing to say, usually, hey, these are the processes that these guys are going through. Like, if BP kills a handful of birds, you see birds in oil, like that gets national news. But then wind turbines by their nature chop up some of the most beautiful and rare form of birds, and that doesn't get as much attention. So in a sense, part of the fossil fuel industry's job is being done for them by this movie. And that's why you're actually getting a lot of enthusiasm from them.
Yep.
But I think that enthusiasm is misplaced.
Yes.
if we're really going to encourage people to watch this movie without severe qualifications.
Yes. And so why is the energy industry so reluctant to bring up these points, which in this movie about kind of the cost of this so-called green energy and the even in their own terms, right? That is so this is so devastating. Why is the energy? This seems like a low-hanging fruit if you're going to criticize green energy. Why doesn't the industry do that at all?
Well, green, sometimes it goes by renewable, is viewed as a moral ideal. And the dominant narrative with energy is we need to transition from dirty, unsustainable fossil fuels to clean, sustainable green energy. And so the comfort zone for people not willing to challenge that narrative has been, we are a necessary evil that is bridging us toward a future of green energy. So they have, I think, a lot of reluctance to being seen as anti-green energy, because they think that they have a coherent position of just saying, okay, leave us around for a couple decades until green energy can take over and we're all for it. And this is why you see on their brochures, you see wind turbines and solar panels, and BP famously described themselves as beyond petroleum back before the oil spill. So I think that's a big part of it, is there's not a lot of moral clarity about what they do stand for positively, because if I think if there was, they would talk about something like, we want the best energy. We don't want the greenest energy. We want the best energy for human beings now and in the future. And we believe we produce that now, and we're going to do our best to produce that in the indefinite future, but not we're getting off our evil energy. Just we need to do it slowly to be practical.
And when you talk to energy executives out there, is anybody, are people receptive to the positive moral message?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the easiest I think has been internally. So when talking to employees, I think there's probably a higher self-esteem in the fossil fuel industry. I mean, honestly, I think because of my work than there was before that work. I mean, certainly anecdotally, have many people in surveys we've done, but just people saying, I feel better about what I do. And for some of them, it's translated into the ability to articulate it. And I think that what's difficult though is on a corporate level or an association level to get that kind of buy-in where people are willing to go out on a limb and say, hey, look, there are real problems with these alternatives. Like, yeah, it's not really energy and it's not really green. That takes a certain amount that's a real commitment. And most of the communication in the fossil fuel industry is done by the public communication is done by a very small handful of associations and companies. So you're talking like the American Petroleum Institute, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, BP, and a lot of these are European, so they're even more enmeshed in the green. So with some of them, Exxon occasionally says something good. Chevron's, I think, probably the best overall in terms of what they say. But it's been, I think, what they'll do is they'll say pretty passively, but straightforwardly, hey, we are actually like, we are going to be the lowest cost solution for decades to come. There is going to be demand for our product. But Exxon, for example, you see them with commercials glorifying algae-based energy and other kinds of biofuels. Like they're more trying to say, yeah, we're innovators in this too. But I think what Michael Moore's is not his movie, but Jeff Gibbs's movie that he's backing shows it's really powerful to demonize green energy. And I've been advocating for a little while that you should demonize green energy and that all forms of energy should be viewed as competing processes. You can't have some forms of energy are industrial processes and then some are magic.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the first time I think it hit me, this idea of what green energy really is about, is when you called, and this is years and years ago, when you called the Tesla a coal car. And that was just a brilliant integration. It kind of hit, because it suddenly kind of hits you, right? Where does the electricity come from? And in the movie, they mentioned that. They asked well, and they do this over and over again. They keep asking, well, where does the electricity come from? Who is producing this electricity? So maybe let's do, before we get into what the movie's really about, let's do, can you give us a few examples of why green energy is not green that they present in the movie?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they present a lot. And in my podcast Power Hour last week, I have some clips from the movie, but, one is just solar panels. So insofar as people think solar panels are made of anything, they think of it as just, it's just sand. So just like, and people think, well, there's a lot of sand, which is actually interesting because there are real sand shortages throughout the world, which is a whole fascinating industrial issue. And there's a whole need for proper laws with sand because people are like dredging up beaches. It's like, I think it's called The World in a Grain.
They're using it for beaches. So what's
No. I mean, it's called, I believe there's a book called The World in a Grain. I've read only part of it. It's fascinating. You can tell this is just because they're just talking about the amount. This is the most used resource in the world. It's used for building all these cities. And but they need it's like the sand that you have in the desert, if I'm remembering correctly, like that doesn't have the right structure to be the good basis of buildings. And so a lot of times they're dredging up different beaches and there are sand pirates. Like this is a real issue that needs law.
Concrete for making concrete.
Yeah. I mean, it's just massive. If you look at how much sand China is using in these markets, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it evolves. But
that's why my beaches are being depleted from sand. I mean, that's
it could be
really not acceptable. That's right.
It could be. But people's, I think, image is, well, there's a desert and it's got a bunch of sand, and then we just sort of run that sand, and then it's solar panels, and then that's that's a little bit, but that's not so bad. And what Ozzy Zahner, who's the technical person in the movie, he wrote a book called Green, I think it's Green Illusions, not Green Illusions or Green Delusions, but I think it's Green Illusions. And he shows, no, this is actually made from primarily quartz and coal. And if you think of quartz, this beautiful rock, and you see these quartz mines. So what they do is they're good at just showing you the visuals of, okay, here's where this actually comes from. And then, oh, it's also using coal, and then it's putting off these greenhouse gases. And I think the most memorable sequence of the movie is there's about a 2-minute montage where it says how solar panels and wind turbines and batteries are made. And it's got to be 150 like discrete clips. And it just shows, oh, well, like coal and melting metal. And you just get and it's such a test of perspective, because most of it is, if you're pro industry, you think, oh, this is pretty cool
Beautiful,
that they're doing it. But then they also will show, for example, in that montage, they'll show like children in the Congo picking up cobalt. And so that one would have real issues with, particularly because it's not at all disclosed. And then they'll show with the, so that's one kind of thing, like the human rights issues of having child labor get cobalt so that green energy can be a little bit less expensive. Another thing is just the sheer size of the wind turbines. People have no clue of just how big those are. And so they're just these massive, massive structures, like, putting a 747, like, whatever, the head of it up and the tail down. It's just these massive things. And then they have a couple of examples of what happens when these things are no longer useful, because there's an idea of renewable, but nothing is really renewable, but certainly not these structures that might have a 10, 20, maybe max 30-year lifetime. And so then what happens to these massive amounts of metal and concrete, and are they really decommissioned? And so they show examples where the wind turbines are just sitting there and rusting. And you get this idea, oh, wait, there's no real renewable magic energy. Everyone is playing the same game of trying to combine finite materials in a cost-effective way to generate the different kinds of reliable energy that we need. And so in that sense, I think it's a positive, but the whole slant on it is, no, we shouldn't be using this either.
Yeah, I mean, I thought some of the funniest parts were where, people claiming, oh, we've got solar energy or we got wind, everything is renewable here. And then they go backstage and what they find is, solar panels are basically providing electricity to this one lamppost, but there's not enough electricity to provide for the whole event or whatever.
And it's even like a concert, right? It's not like they're making steel. It's like they're powering.
But they even went to this one array of solar panels in Michigan, and the guy said, well, really, if you really tested this, this couldn't even, it's a massive array of, maybe could do a house or 10 houses. I can't remember.
Now this is where it's getting some legitimate criticism. So it's worth talking about how the green energy movement is criticizing it. Again, I discussed this in some depth in my podcast, but one thing you'll notice about some of the footage is a lot of it is about 10 years old.
Oh.
So it has the feel of, this guy's been making this movie for a long time and trying to get it. And so you look at like that example from the examples from Michigan. They have the debut of the Chevy Volt, which is not exactly the newest battery powered car. I think it's not even made anymore. It's at least about to go extinct. And so one of the criticisms of the movie is, oh, well, this is just criticizing green energy 10 years ago, but it's all improved. But the thing is, 10 years ago, I remember you and I went to a green energy conference together when I worked at the Yaron Institute. And like, they were making all these claims back then of, oh yeah, we can power the whole world by it. And it's not like they were saying, yeah, this doesn't work and it messes up a lot of stuff, but we're working on it. It was, no, this is the future now. We should mandate it now. We have the technology now. And so what you see is some of these things, although mostly not, the impact and danger issues, I don't think have been addressed very often. And in fact, are much worse because the scale is bigger. But yeah, these like solar panels are more efficient than they were 10 years ago, and wind turbines are more efficient, and they're a little bit, and batteries are certainly better. But the question, so for the green part of it, the green problem with green energy, in a sense, they're more efficient at generating energy. So they're maybe a little more green, but there's a lot of them. But for the energy part of it, yeah, they're a little better at energy. But the question is, are they actually self-sufficient sources of energy that can substitute for fossil fuels? The answer is definitely no. So that part of it is still true. And that the critics of it do not really engage with that, or they keep saying the same schematic kind of propaganda they've been using for 10 or 15 or 20 years.
And they never mention, I mean, the whole movie, they never mention, there's one mention of nuclear,
Yeah.
kind of a throwaway, but there's no mention of nuclear
I know.
power, even an alternative, nothing, zero.
Yeah,
It's-
and that's interesting. That goes, I think, to part of the philosophy of
Yep.
the movie, because part of what's wrong with the movie is they're looking. What I criticize people on how they evaluate fossil fuels, because they're always exaggerating or more with the side effects, and they're always ignoring the benefits.
Mhm.
And what this movie does is this just applies that methodology to everything. And then if there's an outlier case that doesn't really apply, it just ignores it. So, for example, on nuclear, like if you're worried about wildlife, nuclear is definitely the best thing because it doesn't take up much space. You can do it anywhere, and you don't. I mean, mainly it doesn't take up much space, and so you wouldn't need to cut down any forests if that's a, to the extent that's a priority. So they don't mention it. But even I was just reviewing the beginning of the movie, they'll talk about the history, and they begin with like, oh, people have been warning about. They have one guy warning about catastrophic climate change in the late 50s or something. But then they also, we could talk about that kind of warning, but they show with pollution, they're like, oh, people used to be able to light the lake on fire and these other things, but they don't make the connection. Hey, wait a second, there's a lot less pollution now, and yet we have more energy and more industry. So isn't it possible to get more of the benefits of industry with fewer side effects? And that's the kind of thing with nuclear that you could possibly have, where you can generate low cost energy more cleanly, and with less disruption of anything you want to disrupt. It's going to take no space. And so they just ignore that. So the whole focus is, everything they're trying to show in the movie is how human industry is invariably self-destructive and unsustainable.
So what would you make the philosophical theme of the movie? What's the point they're trying to make?
Well, so I think the kind of plot theme, if we're going to use objectivist terminology, is something like green energy destroys the planet too.
Yes.
Like green energy, or you can say like green energy can't save the planet. But I mean, the broader idea is that saving the planet requires dehumanizing
Yes.
the planet. That's called like planet of the humans. And that's a bad, notice that's a bad, it's not like, oh, it's really good that we've humanized the planet, so now it's a human friendly place. And it begins with like, what if a species took over a planet? Like, well, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
I mean, if you mean by take over, like if you take over something, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it means that you're in control of it, and you're not being hurt by it, and you get to enjoy it. So I think like, yeah, is it good that we can take over Fiji? Yeah, that's good. I mean, in terms of we can enjoy that natural beauty and we can master it versus being at the mercy of nature. But that's how I think of the overall theme.
Yeah. I thought the final few scenes were really reflected that. So if I think about, if I was going to project what a environmental or any kind of, or a virus or whatever catastrophe would be to the world, you would show decayed cities, children starving, things like that, things that affect human beings. But when they project what a catastrophe to the world is, they show monkeys dying, they show forests destroyed. This standard of value is completely centered around, what they call the environment, nature out there. Monkeys are the superior, whatever. And of course they elicit emotions because they're so human-like, but they're not enough human enough to be evil as these filmmakers would suggest. So it's anti-human, and nature is an end in itself. Nature as an intrinsic value, and all human beings can do, and this is true, is in a sense destroy that nature, change it, manipulate it. And the profit motive, of course, is the thing that drives that. Self-interest, in a broader sense, drives all that.
Well, but I mean, destroy wouldn't put in the same category as master. I mean, from their perspective, it's definitely in the same category.
Yes, for their perspective, and that's why they use the term master, because for them, mastering is destroying.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the final scene of the movie, and it's really well done scene, is with this orangutan,
Yes.
and a forest is being chopped down progressively, and it's on a tree, and it's like, one limb gets chopped off and it has to go to another limb, and the forest is shrinking, and then ultimately all the trees are down, and then it's on the ground, and you're like, yeah, you don't want to see this. I mean, that's not an enjoyable thing. It's a painful thing, and it looks a lot like a human. But the idea is, like, this is what industrial civilization is inflicting misery upon this orangutan. Whereas in reality, the more primitive we are, the more we do have to be at war with that orangutan, because we are so hard for us to produce food, and we're so vulnerable to all the different parts of nature, including the orangutan, in terms of just like taking our food, uh, that we do need to have an adversarial relationship. Whereas the more industrialized we are, the more we can master nature, the more we can decide, hey, it would be cool to have an orangutan preserve so we can see these animals. And I really like, I really like seeing different animals, and I'm very enthusiastic about that kind of thing. And I think of it as like artworks, and they're these evolutionary artworks. And I would not like to see those works of mastery destroyed, but that's within the
Sure, but
context of,
you wouldn't stop us, Africa as it becomes richer, which hopefully it will one day, building cities in habitat that was orangutan habitat
yeah,
and
you need to
shrinking
decide.
number of orangutans ultimately, right?
Yeah, or you could just, or it could also be that as you become wealthier, then you just, and your a lot of your industry takes up a smaller space, then you can have larger amounts of space for that, and much better versions of what we have in terms of zoos. But I mean, it's definitely, yeah, but part of what you're bringing up is that the idea, I mean, this is one of the evasions of the movie, the idea that billions of people have been raised from poverty and misery by industry, and there are billions more who are
Yep.
still in that state. That has zero, that is not acknowledged once in the movie, except it's acknowledged, and this is the most revealing part of the movie, where this guy, do you remember what he said was the most disturbing statistic pretty much he had ever come across?
No, I can't remember
It
that.
was it was a combination of the number of humans on the planet, and then the amount of consumption of the humans on the
Yes, it was
planet.
that graph, the graph we
Yeah, yeah.
all
So it's
celebrate.
10 times more humans consuming 10 times each. They said, this means we're having 100 times more impact on the planet. They said, this is the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. And you just think about what that means concretely. Is it means that, oh yeah, humans are not dying during childbirth. They're not dying when they're 15. They're living a long time. So the death rate is lower. And they also are able to have something resembling a modern life. They're able to have ample food and protection from the elements and medical care and time to, they can actually choose what they want to do with their life. That's what this impact amounts to. And yet he views this as bad. So there's just zero acknowledgement that nature does not give us the resources we need to flourish. And in fact, it gives us many threats, and that we have to radically transform nature to have a chance at flourishing. Like, there's just no recognition of that, not even one time in the movie. It's basically just nature is perfect. We got greedy, and now we're going to ruin it. And so we'll probably go extinct in 10 or 20 or 30 years.
So if green energy is not the solution, what is the solution they propose to this quandary?
Well, they would say we're not really, we don't have all the answers. But insofar as they do have any answers, it's reduce the population, and then they're not very specific about that. And in fact, in one of the follow-up interviews, they said, we never said population control, but they do quote people saying, like,
Implied.
the only thing you can do is reduce the number of people. So, I mean, what is, I mean,
Well,
if
and,
you said that,
and the other aspect of that is, because they made an issue of consumption and they repeat this over, is reduce consumption. So the two things that they would like to see is reduce the number of people and reduce what we consume per person.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so and I mean, the one that's more alarming is to the average person is going to be just the reducing the number of people. But part of it is their whole view of consumption is nature is sufficient and gives us enough to consume, and we don't really need more than that. And then you just start to break that down, and like, what the hell does that mean? Like, do I need to live in a place that I really like? Like, do I need to be able to travel to places? Do I need to be able to see my parents
Nope.
if I want to? Like,
Certainly don't need an iPhone.
Yeah. Do I need to be able to access really interesting information anytime? Like, is that so? It's just what part of what's going on is they'll take sort of the most irrational or apparently or at least caricaturable activities of consumption, and then they'll equate all consumption with that. So they'll just say, oh well, this person's just looking at their iPhone 23 hours a day, and that's what it means to consume. So we can just cut this back, and actually they'll be more happy because they'll be living in the forest with the orangutans. It's just like a total demonization of everyone's choices under freedom as valueless, which actually has a lot in common with the current lockdown,
Yes.
which is to say that those have no value either. All that matters is that you don't die from this virus, so that Gavin Newsom will not be embarrassed by that statistic.
Well, you can die for the virus as long as other people don't die for the virus, as long as there's some collective safety that exists out there in people's minds, then we're fine. I mean, the one actually achieves the other, right? Because if the goal is to reduce consumption, which means to reduce production, they're anti-fertilization, they're anti-use of land for agriculture, they're anti all these things. That the outcome of all that is what? Well, it's depopulation. It's people are going to die. Massive number of people.
Impoverishment and death.
Which-
Yeah, and what's interesting is so I've watched some of the interviews that they've done, and one of the threads is coronavirus has accomplished more in 2 months than our movement has accomplished in 30 years. And it's funny because like that could be viewed like some people on the pro-freedom side of things have said that, for instance, about a guy named Tony Heller, who's a really interesting critic of climate catastrophism. He was posting on Twitter. He's generally been supportive of Donald Trump, but he said something like, Trump, or at least the whole lockdown movement, they basically accomplished the Green New Deal. Like they accomplished more destruction than the climate movement has in decades. But then, and that's from the perspective of, oh, these lockdowns are bad. But from Moore's perspective, it's like, no, this shows us what we can do.
Yep.
We don't need to consume all this stuff. And then you just think concretely about how much misery is there in the world? I mean, not even just death, but misery and people's lives being destroyed and their dreams and everything they've built. And then
this is 2 months, right?
Yeah, it's
They would
2
like us
months.
to live like this forever, right?
Yeah. But Michael Moore's perspective is, this is a good sign and people are willing to do this, but we just have to be willing, but they're only unfortunately willing to do it if they perceive it as a threat to humans.
Mhm.
But we need to get them to do even more because there's a threat to the planet.
Whatever the hell that means. Yep. All right, we got some questions about the movie. The movie shows people blatantly lying in order to claim carbon neutrality. Why do people seem to feel no shame lying about these issues?
That's a good question. I mean, it's really because if you look into some of these things, like the 100% renewable this is a related one, like Apple saying, we're 100% renewable. It's crazy to me that there's not a class action lawsuit against these people just saying that, 100% of our electricity is coming from solar and wind. I mean,
they bring that up in the movie. They bring up Apple.
Yeah.
It's
And
the
that's
fault.
one of the services of the movie. And in my podcast about it, I told the story. I don't know if you know this story, but I told the story of how when I used to write for Forbes, and I wrote a piece on Apple's energy accounting fraud. And then Apple's head of PR reports directly to Tim Cook, called Forbes and said, hey, what the hell, take this down. And they took it down. And then I had to revise it a little bit. It was but it wasn't like, hey, this guy, oh, wait, yeah, we're misrepresenting. Maybe we should tell the truth. It's like, shut the hell up. Or maybe you're not going to get any exclusive access to the next product launch, which is pretty much what they told Forbes.
Well, this is when people believe in a cause, whether it's a religious cause or any kind of cause, and they believe the cause is moral and just and good, lying is just a means to an end. And if the end justifies it, if the end is noble, if the end is good, then you have to lie a little bit to get, religious people do it all the time. And communist socialists do it all the time. And of course, environmentalists do it when it's because they have this moral fervor around them that this is right and just.
Yeah. I think I mean, the movie is, one thing that goes on at the movie is it's very anti-corporate. I mean, that's an understatement. It's very anti-corporate, but the corporation is obviously an evil entity that should not exist. But they do point out some interesting connections between some corporations and making a lot of money off being green. And this in general happens with moral movements where people will try to make money off the values generated by the movement. And there's this whole phenomenon of this, I don't know what the right term is, but basically just claiming everything is green, and just in ways that are just really dishonest. And it's interesting how much like the Sierra Club, Greenpeace buy into this. And one service this movie does is actually somewhat honest and says, yeah, no, this isn't green. This isn't substantial if you're talking about reducing human impact. And I suspect a lot of what's going on behind the scenes is, look, these are nonprofit organizations. They raise money. There are billions of dollars that they can get. I mean, what did Jeff Bezos just commit to giving $10 billion to climate activists? That's like giving $10 billion to destroy $10 trillion. That's like there's a reverse investment right there, what he's done. I mean, that's really sad because I generally admire him a lot. But there's this, I mean, there is this kind of corruption. It's not the primary cause. The primary cause is that people think of human impact as bad, and they think that minimal impact is the ideal, and that sets off all of these incentives. But I do think it's a good thing when people within that movement are more honest and say, hey, look, no, this green energy is not really green. And I think there's a huge opportunity for like the oil and gas industry, the coal industry, to call Apple and others out and say, look, this is energy accounting fraud. And I do think there should be lawsuits, because you can't just sell products and say, hey, our products were made via this process, and that's why you should buy them and feel good. And then they were not made by that process at all.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the fun parts of the movie is that they get Al Gore and they get, what was the guy who you debated?
Bill McKibben.
Bill McKibben. And they show them making a fortune off of claiming something's green when by their standards, it's not green. That is, by their standards, they're completely defrauding people.
So I don't know what Gore said in response to this. McKibben was interesting because his whole response was like, I didn't make any money off anything, which I believe. Yep. I don't think he's motivated by money. I wish he was motivated by money. I think he's motivated by something much worse than money. But what I found most interesting with the portrayal of McKibben and some of the others is what happens when they were confronted with some of these questions about, hey, how's Germany actually powered? And what's the role of biomass as a big focus? So cutting down trees. And I think that the whole idea of the idea that cutting down trees is bad inherently is that permeates the movie, and that's wrong. But nevertheless, there are some practices in terms of biomass that people have no idea, including like using tires to generate the biomass energy to get the fire hot because the wood on its own is not hot enough. But Bill is asked specifically about, hey, Germany, what about all this biomass in Germany? That's actually a large source of the renewable, not solar and wind. And McKibben didn't even know anything. He just said, yeah, I'm not very familiar with Germany. And I ran a quote of him when I was debating him saying like, oh yeah, Germany's getting all their energy from solar wind. So he doesn't even know anything, and they don't care. And Van Jones was the same, one of Obama's green gurus. And he just said, yeah, I'm not as familiar with that as I should be. And these guys they're calling for the whole overthrow of fossil fuels. And they're saying we in our wisdom know how to centrally plan a new green economy, and they don't even know anything specific. And that I just found incredibly revealing in terms of they're very clear on what they want to destroy, and they are clueless about what they claim to want to create.
That's true it's true of socialists too, right? I mean, when you talk to most statists and socialists, they have this vague utopian vision of what they'd like. They have no real clue about how it actually functions and how it actually, all they know is they hate the world as it is. They hate capitalism, they resent capitalism, and they want it destroyed. I don't know if you follow this guy, this communist who calls himself a communist, Zizek. And he says it. I don't know exactly what, he's just one of these gurus among the left. He says, the left is all corrupt. He says, because they can't project an image about where they're heading. And I don't know exactly where we should head, but this is unacceptable. What we have right now, this is clearly wrong and evil and bad, and we need to destroy it.
Yeah, but and that comment actually I should attribute. I think the first person who made this point in general, I think he made it about socialism or collectivism, was Onkar. I remember once talking, and he said something about like the left or socialists. I'm not exactly sure which, but has always been very clear on what they want to destroy and not very clear about what they want to create. And you see that with just, oh, the state's going to wither away, and it's going to be, and there's no concrete idea. And I would just say, by the way, when people say, "Oh yeah, we got to change the system, we got to overthrow the system," like you and I would agree there are huge problems with the system, but today's system works incredibly well compared to the system of 50 years ago, 100 years ago, in terms of just quality of life. Now, we have reasons to think it could be a lot better, and we can point to the causality of the freedom of previous systems and how if that occurred today, then we'd be better off. But when people just say like, "Oh yeah, we got to change the system and overthrow it," you better know what the hell you're doing, because this is sustaining billions of people at an unprecedented level. And the idea, oh, well, AOC, her guess is like, we might as well go with her idea. Like the idea is, now you should be very suspicious of anyone who wants to overthrow, and particularly if they have no specific idea about what it's going to look like.
Yep. All right, let's go. Anything else about the movie before we, one question here about the movie. Population growth. Why don't we think it's a problem? I mean, it seems
it's arguably a problem in the
will destroy the world. I mean, it seems like it would be a problem.
Well, I mean, I think the empirical problem is population shrinkage.
Yes.
That's actually in wealthier countries. I mean, that you can think of some scary stuff, particularly with the welfare state and we're already experiencing it. But basically just, you have, if you're not having more kids, then what's happening, and particularly you have these welfare states, and that's a scary kind of direction. I think one thing that you have is, so I guess, you could ask sort of theoretically, what if, you could invent a world where there are no birth control, and then say, well, but there were no birth control, but there were, like, you could keep producing enough food to sustain everyone. That's just not the world we live in. If you did that, at some, but who knows? We have no idea, like 70 billion, it's totally plausible that would be great, and that it would be better.
Yeah. So I guess the question is, the number of people here in the chat who seem to think too many people is a problem. Too many people means, a lot of people means lots of productive people creating and building things, higher probability of, geniuses, because it's a numbers game. You just get more people born with their ability to produce amazing things, just more people to trade with, more people to engage with, more artists, more stuff. So it's not, people don't deplete, people create, people build, people make. So it's exact opposite of way of thinking. The environmentalists view the world as a zero-sum game. Every additional person takes stuff, whether it's from the earth or from other people. We view the world as a win-win, as filled with win-win in a free, assuming it's free.
Yeah.
So it's there are other planets, there are asteroids to colonize. There's lots of work to be done. We need more people to do it. I'm being facetious, but there's no limit to how many people can be sustained in any particular place or time.
Yeah. So the idea that human beings are net producers. So that means it's like, oh, well, what if, if you were to put it as, what if 10 billion super productive people came into existence? You'd say that's great. And right now you think with something like a dangerous virus, it's particularly where you want, I would love a bigger pool for geniuses right now. Cause you just think about, if you look like over the next year, maybe even so far, but you're going to see there's certain individuals who have breakthroughs in terms of therapies, if not vaccines. And that's not going to be that many people involved in that. And it's going to be certain like thinkers who think outside the box, so to speak. And so it's just exciting when you think about globalization to think about, what if all the minds in these countries are actually liberated and can participate? And I used this example last time, but this show we really like, Mr. Sunshine, this South Korean show, this really sticks in my mind as just an example of like, isn't it great that there's like the American spirit in South Korea? And and when people say like, oh, I wish all the movies were made in America, I just cannot relate to that at all. You know, you want to know, wow, what can everyone do?
That's right. One of the shows I've enjoyed the most over the last couple of years, and Alex is watching it now and enjoying it, is I mentioned on the show is Mr. Sunshine, which is a Korean show. And yeah, I wish more countries in the world were free, because I think what happens is you get a lot of people and their productivity is constrained by statism and by political regimes that don't allow them to flourish and produce and create. But if you have more and more people living under freedom, oh my God, I mean, the one can only imagine the possibilities of human creativity and human productivity. Plus, it provides more countries that are free, provides us more options for when they lock down Puerto Rico and California. We can go to wherever that place is where they don't lock you down. South Korea, it turns out.
Yeah, although they just passed a Green New Deal, so.
Yeah, it's funny. South Korea is ruled right now by a very, very leftist administration that happened to get coronavirus right, but nothing else, right? Everything else they do is terrible. It's one of these, it's strange sometimes who gets these things right and who doesn't.
Yeah.
A lot of times there are people within the government who are good at their jobs. It's rare, but it happens. So, people the equivalent of the CDC. And in South Korea, they handed it over to those people, and they happen to be good people, and they happen to experience because of SARS and stuff. So they got it right. Whereas in our country, the last people the government wanted to talk to was the CDC or anybody with any expertise, because the whole process was far too politicized from the beginning. All right, let's move to some of these broader questions on.
These are questions about climate, I think, that came up last time. Is that right?
Yeah, most of them are about climate. There are a few about broader environmentalism stuff, and there are a few that you might not want to answer, and I might not want to ask you, so I might.
Oh, that's what I want to know. I mean,
I'll ask them, and then you can decide if you want.
Oh my God, what could those possibly be?
Can you provide a list of layman books on climate change that were worth reading? And if not, is there on your website, or is there some place where you have those?
Man, it's so hard to endorse them consistently. I think that one does a pretty damn good job, though, is there's a book by Roy Spencer called Global Warming Skepticism for Busy People.
Oh.
I think he does a good job at summarizing a lot of how climate works and summarizing the arguments on different sides. And he tends to be a good popularizer. So he's one of the pioneers of satellite measurement. So he's definitely known as on the side of quote unquote skepticism. So he's not exactly mainstream, but he has been an innovator in the field. And I think that's the thing I've read recently that's best. I think Moral Case for Fossil Fuels is pretty good at summarizing it. That's a good question. I'll try to make a note to, on my podcast, think about a list, because I see so many of them, but I'm always thinking of it from kind of the perspective of what can I extract from it versus is this overall, would I recommend this wholesale to someone else?
Yeah. It might be worth on your blog or somewhere to just put a few books with some caveats. This reminds me, why don't you give a plug to your website, your podcast and stuff? So
the easiest way to learn about my stuff is if you go to industrialprogress.com, you can just sign up for our mailing list. And so I have a weekly email once a week that has everything. And that'll pretty much get you everything. I mean, you can look, I'm on Twitter and I'm on all the other things, but industrialprogress.com, just getting on that list, I think that's the quickest way to get everything.
Great. All right, here's a jiu-jitsu question. Who's your favorite, what do they call it, player, jiu-jitsu player? Is that right? Fighter?
Mm-hmm.
Who's your favorite?
Now or ever?
Well, do both. What the hell?
I mean, ever, I would say Rickson Gracie, and current, I love, there's a guy named Gordon Ryan whom I love. He's really interesting. He's so entertaining to follow on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, I'd highly recommend following him. if you're anything resembling an objectivist, because he's essentially a hybrid objectivist Nietzschean. And
Oh,
I
wow.
don't know if he's read any Ayn Rand, but he is like, I love watching him talk about the lockdown. His whole focus is essentially he's been saying for the last 3 years, like, I'm better at jujitsu, at least without a it's called no-gi jujitsu. I'm the best no-gi grappler in the world. And he has an instructor who's a philosopher, this fascinating guy named John Danaher, who's like, this is such a good thinker. I have no idea how he came out of contemporary philosophy, but he was about to get his doctorate in philosophy at Columbia, and then decided to devote himself full-time to being a jujitsu coach. So he's this like, genius jujitsu coach. And has this protege, Gordon Ryan. And for 3 years, Gordon Ryan has been saying, like, we're better, our methodology is better. And in the last 2 years, he just started beating everyone. And so all he ever does is say, like, okay, here's how I'm going to beat you. And then he does it. And then he explains how he did it. But he's also just totally focused on human achievement. So he's always just talking about, like, I earned this, you didn't. Why is the government taking away all my money? Why am I being locked down? So I love watching people who are successful and proud of it.
Proud of
So
it.
he's very fun to watch. So those are two of my favorites.
All right. So any thoughts on Naomi Siebert, the 19-year-old anti-Greta climate activist? She bills herself as a climate realist and seems thirsty for more knowledge. Do you know who?
Yeah,
this-
I've gotten to know her a little bit. I've talked to her about having her on my show. So, and I know she listens to Power Hour a lot. So I'm grateful for that. So
Okay.
I think generally she's in the right direction. I don't know too much about her, but I'm at least exploring having her on the show. And she's,
Somebody writes a warning that she's alt-right conspiracy theorist. I don't know if any of that's true.
okay. I can look into that. But in terms of what I've seen her say publicly, it's been quite articulate, and certainly I agree with it a lot more than I agree with what Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, well, that's Greta would be hard to match. All
In
right.
terms of level of disagreement.
Any thoughts on the evolution of BJJ? What's BJJ?
That's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Yeah, that's
Over the last
my answer to that cannot be of general.
And how it was evolved. What are the leading schools grappling with? Oh my God. All right.
No, I would just say the only thing that's interesting about that is how the standards of value always affect everything. So it's like, historically it was more based on fighting and beating people in a self-defense situation. That leads to certain emphasis. And now it's based on beating people primarily in jiu-jitsu competition. So in some ways it makes it less applicable to self-defense. But then at the same time, when people go, the money is mostly in mixed martial arts where you have to incorporate it with everything else. So that tends to make it evolve in more of a self-defense direction. So it's a fascinating thing because you have a lot more people and it's evolving a lot, but the rules determine so much about how it evolves. And that's just an interesting general point. Like whatever standard you're telling people to meet, they will compete to meet that. And it's just like in a socialist country, if it's all about meeting the approval of the government, then people are going to compete to do that. So you should think a lot about what your standards are in anything.
Yeah, you can see the whole regulatory state. That's a big issue, right? Because they determine the standards by which people compete, and they determine what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So you get industries that evolve in particular ways because that's how the structure of regulation determined that they would evolve. What is the best way to handle climate alarmist activists who use the tactic and try to equate Holocaust denial with climate change denial?
I have a talk about this. If you look up how to be a climate thinker, I gave a 20-minute talk on this, but the core of it would be, if somebody, this is a general point, like if somebody usually if there's a side of things that you think is consistently wrong, you can bet that the way they conceptualize things, including the words that they use, are not going to be what you regard as accurate. And so it's really worth rethinking how you characterize yourself and how you characterize them. So there's I would characterize myself as I'm not a climate science denier, I'm a climate thinker. So that means I look at, I look at both the benefits and the side effects of fossil fuels with as much precision and accuracy as possible. And it's also like I use the term climate catastrophists. I certainly don't use the term climate change believers or climate science believers. I think there's a broader issue in terms of thinking. I don't, it's shocking to me how passive people are with terminology,
Yep.
because it's just always rigged against you.
Absolutely.
If somebody's arguing against you, the terminology is rigged against you. And it's not that, as long as you use words that people can understand, you can reframe it pretty quickly in a better way.
Agreed. Patrick Moore suggests it's a mistake to see the premise that CO2 is bad for the environment, but rather it leads to more greening of Earth. Any thoughts?
I don't think that's an exactly accurate statement of his view. By the way, Patrick Moore I would really recommend following him on Twitter. I am a big fan of his, and he's one of those people I've become an increasing fan of. He used to be part of Greenpeace. I mean, he was one of the co-founders, although there's all kinds of controversy about that, but he's an early founder of Greenpeace. And for a while, I've told him this, like I was very suspicious of him, because like, how could you ever be a member of this? And he used to be anti-nuclear. And I just thought, how could you be a good thinker, even potentially a good thinker, if you were ever anti-nuclear? But he really is a good thinker. And he's fascinating because he knows a lot about ecology, and he really likes humans.
Yeah.
And understands capitalism pretty well. So I think his Eco Sense on Twitter, but if you just look up Patrick Moore. So he's very big on emphasizing the benefits of CO2 fertilization. I think that's legitimate. And he says, yes, CO2 has a warming influence, and there could be some good and there could be some bad. We don't really know, but there is this greening influence that's good. So I think he's generally good on that. I wouldn't put it as CO2 hurts the environment or not. I mean, I'd say it's like, are rising CO2 levels on net good or bad for human beings? The reason I may seem to have a little bit of a different position is I think it's important to start off with how to think about the issue. So the question is, if there are negative side effects from this, how do we think about it versus scientifically proving that there aren't? I think too much of the opposition to anti-fossil fuels has been saying, oh, CO2 does nothing harmful at all. And then you're conceding that if CO2 does any harm, then fossil fuels are bad. And so that's what my whole focus is. No, we need to look at the benefits and the side effects with precision. And then once you get people to do that and to actually be precise about CO2, then they're open to the kinds of arguments that Patrick Moore makes very well.
Says, why don't you mention that climate scientists have a conflict of interest as they dole up $2 billion of government grants to push propaganda?
I love questions that begin with, why don't you?
Yeah, I know. I too. I hate that.
I just occurred to me. I don't mind it. It's actually a good question, but it's kind of like, why don't you do this? That's another one where I'm going to mention it a little bit in the new version of Moral Case for Fossil Fuels when that comes out. But there's a question of when you're making an argument, you have to think about who the audience is and when it makes sense to introduce a certain point. So if somebody's saying fossil fuels are bad, they're destroying the planet, like at what point in that are you going to introduce, okay, there's funding incentives for people to distort the nature? Because then does the case for fossil fuels really depend on corruption of government officials? And then people start to think, well, could everybody be corrupt? And are all the scientists being paid off? It's easy to go down a path where it's really far-fetched. And I don't think it's a complete answer. So it's true that there are incentive issues. And I think it's worth pointing out. It's worth particularly pointing out that any kind of monopoly in the field of knowledge is very dangerous, even if people are well-intentioned. So one point is if the government, this is actually the same issue as the jiu-jitsu question. What is your standard? So if the standard for government funding of climate research is show us things that will explain the negative impact that CO2 is having on our future, what are people going to find? Even if everyone is totally honest, what's going to happen is the people who disagree with that are going to be filtered out. And in general, the people who have them over time, the people who believe in that more are going to do it, and then their students will be promoted. So I think it's a good point to make about the monopoly nature of it. In general, anything that smacks of conspiracy theory, though, I just avoid totally, because it's never fully true, but it's also not a good starting point. I try to start off with how to think about the issue and then see what are the key facts that are necessary to like to execute on the thinking. So it's okay, what are the benefits? What are the side effects? And with fossil fuels, you can explain so much about the benefits of them that can influence people so much. And then once you see that and people see, wow, there are these huge, unique benefits that I never thought of. And nobody has presented that to me. Yeah, I guess it's plausible that if they're ignoring the benefits, people could be exaggerating the side effects. Or if you say, oh, this climate stuff you've heard, this is nonsense. CO2 is good. There's this government conspiracy theory. Then you don't help them think about it, and you sound like a crank.
Yep. Yeah, I agree completely. And if you're interested in the people are motivated by money and it's corrupt argument, then actually the Michael Moore movie has a lot of that in it. So,
I thought you were going to say read The Establishing of an Establishment by Ayn Rand, because that's the essay that really explains that dynamic.
Yes. That's a better recommendation.
Even better than Planet of the Humans.
Yeah.
Even better than.
Is 0 point energy a real thing? I don't know what that is. What are the chances that we'll see it happen?
I don't even know what it means.
You don't know what it means. Okay.
Or supposed to mean, but I would guess no. Yeah.
Is there going to be a new Dark Ages? And if there was going to be a new Dark Ages and you could choose only one book to be discovered in 1,000 years, which book would it be?
I don't think there's going to be one.
No, I don't think there is.
I mean, are all the books gone? Like, yeah, do they know English?
Can only save one.
But can they read? Have they not learned? Like, there's just, I mean, if I could say Atlas Shrugged, but what is that? Like, do they know what the words mean?
What would it mean to them? Maybe it would have to be Anthem. I don't know. I mean, I gave this talk about how to be an optimist in this world. And one of my arguments is that we're not any Dark Ages that comes, and it could be a decline in civilization. I'm not suggesting there couldn't be one. But if in Roman times, when Rome disappeared, there was a Dark Ages because there was nothing else. There was many people around on planet Earth, but only very few were civilized. We live on a planet with 8 billion people who all have access to knowledge, and who many of them have now gone to college. There are millions of engineers around the world. There are, knowledge is dispersed in a way that even if the United States collapsed tomorrow, I mean, there would be dire economic consequences, but the knowledge would not just disappear in all in one swoop swoop like it did during Rome. Everything is now written down. I mean, there's just too much knowledge, and it's too dispersed to actually see a true Dark Ages.
There's an interesting moral point, because I think sometimes it's viewed as like the case for being for freedom is that we're going to collapse into a Dark Ages if we're not for freedom. And that's a weird, I mean, I think the real thing is that the better policies are, the more chances you have to flourish, and the more chances other people whom you might deal with or care about have a chance to flourish. And if you look at something like lockdowns, this is an interesting case of how do you think about it? I mean, I think what's sad about it is that, it certainly would make my life worse in a bunch of ways temporarily. I think I'm affected much better than most people, but it's really sad to see. But it's not that everyone is just going to die like a fly or something like that. And so you have to really care about like marginal units of human flourishing. But so I don't think of it as like, oh, I'm fighting for freedom so that I'm going to avoid a Dark Age, because otherwise I'm going to drop like a fly. But then it contextualizes like how much time you spend, particularly if it's not your job. It's more our job to do. But it shouldn't be like the whole thing is fighting for the civilization and that's it. You're trying to enjoy your life. And it's not that if you don't fight, everyone's going to die tomorrow. But it is, if you do fight, you could make life better. And when I said earlier, even I'm confident that my work has at least raised the self-esteem of the fossil fuel industry. Okay, that's like a couple million people. Like, that's a good thing. Yeah, it's a big deal, but it's not like the Avengers Endgame. We tend to just think of it as all like the world's all going to be destroyed or nothing, and it's much more of a marginal thing.
And there's a very much a end of the world mentality that is easy to fall into. And we are going to save it or not, right? But it's up to us. It's like we're that important or that significant, and it's about the world. When actually it's about you and your life, and it's not about preventing the disaster. It's about improving your life. It's about making your life the best that it can be now and while you're alive. And if you don't see fighting the fight as part of making your life, it's what Ayn Rand said. You know, you live in the future by fighting for it today. It's that part of the fight is to make is making your life better right now.
But you also live in the future that other people fought successfully for.
Absolutely.
So they would want you to enjoy it too.
Yep. Yeah, and the focus should be on the enjoying. I see so many people who focused on the fear, who focused on the dread of what's to come, rather than on the moment and on their lives right now and how much they can be enjoying their lives right now.
Yeah, and with philosophy, I mean, you have so much ability to control your own. I mean, your ability to control your own fate is so disproportionate to your ability to control these other kinds of things. And it is sad to see the amount of destruction that's done by these policies, but that's actually where not being a pathological altruist can help, because otherwise you would be just completely bent out of shape. Like you couldn't even function because you'd see like how much suffering, and it's hard already, even as an egoist, to see like these lockdowns and what they're doing to people. But if I understood what I understand and I was just a total otherist, I don't know how I could function.
And in the 21st century, we have more control of our lives. We have more ability to shape what we do in every moment of our day than in probably any other time in human history. I mean, even with the lockdown, there's so much you can do at home, where that was not true.
Yeah, I mean, we have more capability than somebody did 200 years ago in freedom in many ways. Now we want all the ways.
We want all the ways, exactly. We want it all. All right. Conservative PragerU platform is giving you tremendous exposure on environmentalism.
Oh, I'm glad I'm getting this one. I'm getting this one. Okay, go ahead.
Do you think they would be open to more objectivist viewpoints?
Oh, I thought that wasn't the question. It's always wrong when you expect a question.
Yeah.
So let me comment. I was thinking I have had this opinion that I wanted to talk about.
Answer the question you want to answer.
That's right. I don't know, because I get interesting comments about like, why do you speak here and why do you, and so I'll just give you how I decide on where to speak and how that informs. And I'm not at all saying this should apply to other people or should apply to the Ayn Rand Institute. But one of my beliefs, which may seem counterintuitive in its implications, is that all the dominant views today are deeply, deeply flawed. So I would say modern conservatism is incredibly flawed. Modern liberalism is incredibly flawed. And so, but what that does actually is it makes me more sympathetic to speaking to any audience, because I think a lot of people are in groups because they see the irrationality of another alternative. So I think a lot of people who would consider themselves hardcore conservatives will see certain things about liberals and say, like, I cannot, like in terms of individual responsibility, I cannot possibly like be a liberal. Like there's so much wrong with them. And there's so much culturally bankrupt about them. And so I'm sympathetic to people who think, oh, religion is more of a solution, even though I myself do not think that religion is the solution. If people ask me, I'll explain what I think. But I think of it as I might have a different policy if there were like widespread pockets of rationality where there were like really rationally defined groups. And so it's the same thing. Even, I was on a show with people who at least call themselves anarcho-capitalists, and I explained to them, I do not agree with this, and here's what you should read. But I'm much more sympathetic to them in today's society. I'm much more inclined to speak on that platform because I think that there are many reachable people in the audience. But if you notice, when I'm on these shows, I don't pander to people. And I think that is a mistake. So I've been made fun of. Some people like this, some people don't. On certain shows, they'll notice like someone will say something insider to me that I don't agree with, and like I won't nod my head and say, yeah, you're right. And like, so I'm not at all buddy in terms of
That's good.
Conservative things I disagree with or liberal things I disagree with. But if anyone's wondering, yeah, it's like I'm thinking about, can I reach rational people in this audience? And even if I really strongly disagree with a lot of premises of the host, I often think people see this as the best alternative and they don't know about the better alternatives. And that's part of what I'm here to give them.
Yeah, there's no question if you focus on the audience, that's true. I mean, I have different standards in terms of who I speak to, but I represent a different, different context. So I think we all have slightly different standards for who we'll speak with and who we won't, based on the context from which we're coming from.
But
So
and when people
I won't
criticize,
go and
when
I'll
people
go
are
down.
criti-
Yeah,
when
I won't
people
go
are
on the
critical of,
Catholic blogs and stuff, but I still get criticized in spite of that. Yeah.
but I mean, people are like, I think it's good. I like it if I'm going on a platform and then somebody criticizes things that are wrong about that host. I think that's great. They should
Yeah.
do that.
So,
Um,
absolutely.
and the other thing is, I'm mostly focused on one issue
Yes.
in
And that's
terms of just
that's what I
my,
talked about the context.
yeah. And and so occasionally I'll branch out or something, but if it's, in a different future, I would like, if I was focused on different aspects of my ideas as my profession, then I would have different shows that I would be on and different shows that I wouldn't be on. And so you just have to decide if you're more of a generalist, that's totally fine. And I have general interests, but if I have very, I would say quite at least deep expertise in one topic, and that's usually why I'm being brought on. I tend to focus on that versus, oh, I have interesting ideas about jujitsu. Although I guess I talked about those here, but I try to imply I'm not an expert on this.
So here's another question related a little bit. What was your impression of Candace Owens? We all know she is a Trump religious conservative. However, she seemed blown away by your thought processes.
I would like if that were the case. I don't want to give like comments on what I think of hosts of different shows, but I thought I was able to get out some good points, and I do think she was open to my position. So yeah, check out the interview if you want to.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's on her PragerU.
Yeah, if you just search Alex Epstein, Candace Owens.
Yeah, I mean, that was a question I didn't think you would want to answer. Have you tried to be on Joe Rogan's podcast? He would love you being a fellow BJJ practitioner. He needs to see your video taking on the environmentalist march.
Yeah, I mean, I go on a lot of shows. I'm obviously happy to go on his show. I like him quite a bit. So if you want me on a show, encourage him. I mean, if I thought it would do good to say, hey, Joe, I'm available to be on your show, I would do it. But I don't think that would help.
Hasn't worked for me. So
yeah, but it'll happen. I think it'll happen at some point. I mean, he's an interesting guy. He's a thoughtful guy. And yeah, he's interested in environmental issues. He's interested in progress, and he's certainly interested in jujitsu.
Yeah, and Bernie Sanders, but yes.
Although I think now he said, oh yeah, he would vote for Trump over Biden. Yeah, right. And so that would be an interesting. Yeah, if I went on the show, I would express a different view about Bernie Sanders.
Yes. Has Alex seen Bill Gates's work on nuclear power, and if so, what are his thoughts?
I don't know. I mean, I've seen his work. I've heard him talk about it, and I know he's financed a company, I think Teradyne. He had that special on Netflix that I watched most of, and I watched the energy section of it.
Yeah.
At the moment, I'm very unhappy with Gates in terms of his moralistic cry for a minimum 10-week lockdown, which I thought was like monstrous.
Yep.
And particularly acting like, I mean, especially what we know now, but what we even knew before about death rates and stuff, just like that. Yeah, I just want to wreck people's lives. I just thought that was so bad.
He's pretty much got an attitude of a philosopher king where he thinks, he could run our lives. And a lot of these Silicon Valley types seem to have that.
Yeah. And I think the nuclear. So what he'll do is, I mean, he's smart and he's interested in data. And so sometimes he will particularly avoid completely insane interpretations of data. So he'll be rightly critical of green energy and say, yeah, this doesn't scale at all. This can't do all these different things. There's no evidence of that. Nuclear can do more. So I think he's good in that respect. He also endorses climate catastrophism, although at least he says we should invest in adaptation. So he's kind of decent on these issues, and overall probably a force for good in terms of being pro-nuclear. But my view on nuclear is what's really needed is the right political policy of decriminalization. Somebody really needs to have a platform for doing that. And it's something I plan to work on if somebody else doesn't do it in the next year or two. I'm working on other stuff right now. But I think because the thing with nuclear is it's too much just people saying, oh, this technology is great, but then how is it going to go forward? Is it that the government is going to fund it? Is that really what we want to do? And is that going to really scale? I mean, what you really want is to have the right laws so that entrepreneurs can be building nuclear reactors in their garage. You want that legal framework in place, and to get rid of all the things that make it artificially expensive. So, and I haven't seen anything from Gates on that. I think the philosopher king thing tends to be, let's do some central project.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these guys, I mean, what they try to do is work within the political, they don't try to change politics. And his experience with politics is it screwed him, and he had no impact. He tried, and he had no impact on it. So I think they've given up, in a sense, on changing politics. Then the question is, how do we manipulate the political system so we can get our nuclear project done? And they don't understand that they can't, right? At the end of the day, one way or another, they'll be squashed, and they always will be.
Yeah, well, certainly. And also, if you're just worried about your own project, maybe you can, but they're talking about, I mean, they're trying to artificially accelerate nuclear, even beyond what it would be on a free market. And it's something like, that requires something like building one reactor a day, every day, starting yesterday. I mean, there's no way to do that outside private individuals figuring this out. So if they were serious about scaling it, they need.
Well, he tried to build a reactor in China, and with the Trump-China stuff, that got squashed. So now he's trying to build it.
It's so slow. I mean, the stuff is,
everything.
The rhetoric behind this is so, it's just, they're talking about 10 years to live, 20 years to live. We got to do it. And it's all glacial progress, even on the good stuff like nuclear. So, I mean, I'm fine with it. I mean, we're going to be using more fossil fuels in the next 30 years. I think that's great.
No,
I would like to decriminalize nuclear so that at least we could be getting more energy from nuclear.
Yeah. Environmentalists try to discredit you by saying you are a paid hand. By declaring up front that you are a for-profit entity, does that undercut criticism?
Paid what? Paid hand?
You're basically being bribed to take the position you take.
Oh, I didn't know that. My experience with all of this is just that so much of it comes down to how credibly you make the argument. There's all sorts of things like, oh, I don't have a PhD in climate science or in energy. I think that people can tell pretty quickly, like, are you sincere and do you know what you're talking about? Particularly if you're willing to put yourself in adversarial situations, because then they can see what happens when somebody asks a question, when somebody challenges you. Like, does the facade come off, or is there a lot of depth there? So it's actually, I don't even find that's been that big of a problem. I mean, sure. So yeah, and I think that our primary model has been basically charging people for services, and there are reasons to do that. I mean, I try to think a lot about, what do I do that's going to give me the most independence, and that's also going to orient me toward value creation. And so right now, I mean, even in, historically at different points, what we've done, and we're actually doing it again now, is we've allowed people to give, or asked people to give donations, but to support specifically like research and development and promotion. So like if I have a TV booker, and so I encourage people or supporters, hey, you can help pay for the TV booker, because that might be an investment that's hard for me to make as an individual or even as a company, but you can support that. So we call them accelerators. But yeah, so it's just, for me, is about how do I make sure I'm creating value, and how do I preserve the integrity of the ideas? And I think that can be done as a nonprofit, it can be done as a for-profit. But the core thing you have to grapple with is, do you come across as credible? And that's much more about your ideas and your aptitude. None of these other things is going to affect it that much.
So Silicon Valley doesn't seem to see that environmentalists are nihilists. What has been Silicon Valley's response to your case for fossil fuels?
I think with Silicon Valley, there's a lot of skepticism of the green movement on the nuclear issue that could really be stoked So I think the more I'm not super focused on that, but I'm a little focused on it. And I think that gets some credibility. When I've had the opportunity to present my views, I think it's appealing to a lot of people. I got to speak at Google once. It was a small audience, but it's on their page and it probably has 70,000 views by now. You know, I lived in that area for a year or two. And so I found people were receptive to it. It hasn't been my primary focus. I'm certainly, if anyone knows of any podcasts or venues or anything like that, I'm happy to talk to them. I think in Silicon Valley in general, there are a lot of smart people who feel misrepresented by the public face of Silicon Valley in terms of just the total like hardcore left positioning of a lot of the companies. So I think there are a lot of people on the inside who are quite sympathetic, and it's a group of really smart people. So I think it's a good audience. I haven't had any experience that's made me think they're not open to it. It just hasn't been my focus.
How aware are the major oil and gas executives to your moral fossil fuel arguments? Yeah, that's good enough.
I mean, I think I would be shocked if anyone who didn't know about the book.
Okay.
So, I mean, probably at least 1 out of 2 would know my name if it was just said. And I've met a lot of them, but so that's good. I mean, I'm glad that it has that penetration. There's still another level though, where the arguments are being used in, permeating all the companies and whatnot. Still working toward that slowly.
Somebody asks, wouldn't spreading capitalism solve the supposed population problem? There is no rich country with a high birth rate. There actually is one rich country with a high birth rate.
Which one?
Israel. And I'm not even talking about the religious. Secular Israelis have the highest birth rate among Western countries, among industrialized countries. And
all right.
I think the whole relationship between freedom, wealth, and birth rate, I mean, there's obviously a relationship there, but I think it's also skewed because of the culture, because of the philosophy held by people. I think in a truly capitalist society where, let's say, objectivism or attitude towards self-interest was robust, I think there'd actually be more kids, not less. Not 12, right? But there'd be more families with, the birth rate would be actually higher. I think not having kids like Italy and Spain and most of Europe is a sign of pessimism. It's a sign of kind of hedonistic pleasure of the moment, forget about the future. I think having kids is a expression of a certain optimism about the future, a certain positive future. Anyway, that's my theory.
Yeah, I think, yeah. And you can imagine also that as capability develops, like you can get more help raising the kids.
I see how my friends today, well, let's say a little younger than me, but have more money because they're older and they, whatever, they have more money, how they raise their kids and how I raise mine. And it's completely different. I mean, they have night nannies and the potential for having help with kids is so vast as you get wealthier. And as we all get wealthier, raising kids becomes much, much easier. Never easy, but much, much easier. Let's see. What did you think of your debate with Robert Kennedy?
That was probably my best one overall. That's probably. It needs a better YouTube link. That's what I think of it. It's the YouTube link it's on now is hard to find, but if you search Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Alex Epstein, I think you can find it. But that's a
channel.
What's that? No, because we don't own it. It was put on by another organization, but they don't have a super popular YouTube page.
You can't get rights to it. Why don't you ask them to post?
It's a good reminder.
I do what I do when I do events that are going to be video conference. I try to negotiate in advance that they can put it on their channel, but I want a copy on my channel, and that way I then control the marketing of it. So,
yeah, I mean, in this case, the Robert F. Kennedy part of things was very restrictive, so it's even lucky that it got posted by anyone.
Yeah. All right. What is the situation with helium becoming scarce? Is it true and is it a problem? I've heard conflicting views.
No, I have to ask Stefan on my team. There's certain questions I just ask Stefan, and he's more on top of these things than I am. So
okay, we'll have to ask Stefan. Okay, let's see, 2 last ones. First is a request for having Moral Case for Fossil Fuel as an audiobook. And this
is.
person, oh, okay, it is on.
I mean, the new one, and the new one will be, but I have to finish the book.
Okay, he says I would donate to help that happen. It's already on, so it's an Audible.
Yeah, but you can still send me money to pay for the fast.
Cause.
Yeah, it's on Audible. It's on Audible.
Do you have any specific short-term or midterm specific goals in moving the moral case for climate change argument forward? The moral
For
case
fossil
climate
fuels?
change. For fossil fuels, I think he means.
By the way, I've thought of writing a book called The Moral Case for Climate Change from two perspectives. Because one is it's a totally worth it byproduct because fossil fuels are so good. The other thing is we should be trying to change the climate in terms of mastering, in the sense of mastering the climate.
I've always said global warming would make Canada habitable. So absolutely.
But even more broadly, like what if you could neutralize Hurricane Harvey and
Puerto Rico, absolutely. And we've got earthquakes. If you've got a mechanism to stop those too, that would be good. Because yesterday it woke me up. The building shook so much. It was terrible.
Yeah. So I mean, the basic thing is I'm working on, so I think the most effective thing I did was write a book that I think was influential on a lot of people. That allowed a lot of other things. So now I'm working on a new book that's essentially totally revised. It's basically The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels 2.0. And it's been taking me a long time, but I think it'll be worth it. So my view is that, you know, I felt like that first book, I felt like every minute I invested in making it as good as it was worth it. And so now I'm investing a lot more minutes and a lot more dollars in making the second one better, because books are not the only thing, and they might not even be the best for certain things, but there's something about writing a book, if it really catches on, that it penetrates people's minds in a way that's very hard to match.
Yeah, I agree. Good. Well, we said an hour and a half. We're basically there. Thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Alex said, you can follow him at industrialprogress.com, and he's on Twitter, he's on Facebook, and on YouTube. So you can find.
I have one random thing, by the way. I have a new favorite guy I follow on COVID. So I'm going to have him on my podcast this week, but not all of you listen to my podcast. So if you look up, his name is Daniil Gorbatenko. Yaron, have you followed this guy?
Oh no. Is he good?
I've been recommending him. He's a really interesting guy. I mean, maybe he'll do something irrational and I'll rue this, but it's DANIIL space GORBATENKO. And so he's a PhD economist. He's like a free market economist, but I could just tell what he's really trying to do is really integrate all the research and get a precise understanding of this. And is kind of the most, I don't know, I feel confident in my ability to detect good thinking methods. And I just consistently find he's really trying to find the truth. And he also has an understanding of freedom. So like he's gotten me very interested in like the issue of ventilation, for example, and just, I mean, how irrational the whole opposition to being outdoors is.
Yes. Good. Thanks, guys. So follow Alex, like the show, share it. Don't forget to share. The most important thing you can do on social media is share. And of course, you can support the Yaron Brook Show at yaronbrookshow.com/support. Alex, thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Great to see you again.
Likewise.
And we'll be in touch. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye.